Good morning. Well, how did you get on with Titus? Hey, Titus is a funny little book, isn't it? Not funny in the amusing sense, but strange. As I read through it, I thought I can't really pick out any verse that is one that we use a lot, that we constantly quote, like some verses, like the bit at the end of Ephesians about the armor of God, or the bit in Philippians about thinking about good things and nice things and rejoicing, or even the bit in Galatians about freedom. Um, in Titus, there aren't any verses that we're constantly referring to or quoting. Well, I hope today, when you read it a second time in an alternative translation to the one you used yesterday, it will speak to you. But in only 3 chapters, quite a large part of it is about not getting caught up with arguments and disputes and wrong doctrines and misleading things. Every generation of the Christian faith has a responsibility to guard the truth and pass it on to the next generation. And there is something inbuilt in humankind that always seeks something new, something nobody else has found out, something unusual, something special that sets our denomination or our group apart from others. We have to be very careful that we stick with the sound teaching of Scripture. And this is what Paul was encouraging Titus. Titus was living on Crete. There's not much about Titus. He's not mentioned in the Acts of the Apostles, and he's only mentioned once, and that, I think, is in the last book we read. We came across Titus in 2 Timothy, but we know very little about him, except what we have in this letter. And he was obviously a church leader appointed by Paul and left in Crete. And he had to live with people who had a terrible reputation. Look at 1 verse 12. One of their very own prophet, who said, "Cretans are always liars, vicious brutes, lazy gluttons." What a description of a national characteristics of these people. They were difficult to look after and to handle. And I don't know how one would describe the modern society. Materialistic, expecting things instantly, self-centered. I don't know how you describe them. It'd be quite interesting to try and describe our modern generation. Maybe even the society in which we live locally. How would we describe it to others? But what is important is 2 verse 1. "As for you, teach what is consistent with sound doctrine." We have to make sure that what we propound in our little fellowship and in our little circle of friends is not what we individually think about life, but what the Bible teaches. We need to get our thinking as close to the Bible's thinking as we can. And that's quite difficult in some areas of life, really quite difficult. But that's why it's been, I hope you found it a very good exercise to read through the letters of Paul at one sitting. Now, we haven't done Romans, we haven't done 1 and 2 Corinthians, and I'm not proposing that we spend a day reading and thinking about Philemon. But as Titus is not a very long letter, you could today include reading Philemon and thinking about what Philemon is all about. Paul writing to Philemon. Of all the letters, I think Philemon is the most straightforward and most easy to understand about what it's trying to say, what Paul was trying to say to this one person, Philemon, who was not a church leader. He did not pastor a church or teach or preach, but he was the owner of a slave, Onesimus, who Paul had found, a runaway slave, and Onesimus had come to faith, and Philemon had come to faith, and Paul is trying to sort out the legal side and of their relationship, because Onesimus was a slave. He belonged to Philemon. Anyway, read it and pray with me today. I shall be asking the Lord what we should look at, what we should think about in our thought for the day in future weeks. I've got one or two ideas, but I'm not quite sure where we're going to go. Well, I might have a better idea when I come to tomorrow. I tend not to know in advance much about what I'm going to say, and lean heavily on the Lord for inspiration. So I think that as we've read these letters, it's been good for us to be refreshed in what Paul taught us, because a lot of Paul's teaching is the basis of our faith. The most prolific writer of the New Testament, and one who had spent many, many hours, many years at the Lord's feet, making sense of the Old Testament and the New Covenant, and understanding some deep truths and sharing them with the people that he brought to faith. So that's my thought for the day. My thought for the day is really that we have to guard the faith. And to guard the faith, we have to know what we believe. We have to know what is true and what is not true. And I think one of the biggest and strongest guides is if anyone starts to teach you something that is not clearly taught in Scripture, then you should shun it. Any new ideas, the Scripture itself says that everything we need for godliness and for our life is in the Scriptures. And if someone comes with something new that is not in the Scriptures and not well based on scriptural principles, then you shouldn't get involved with it. It's not wise. There's a lot of subtlety. A lot of the heresies of the church have been very subtle, and they've just deviated a little bit from the truth, but it's led people along a path that hasn't been helpful. So cling to the truths of Scripture as best you can, and we'll do it together, and I hope to see you again tomorrow. God bless. Have a great day. Bye-bye.